Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Cecilia Varela. I'm director of the Mexico operation of Paso-Juarez. I'm very happy to be here and introduce to you the keynote speaker this day. I would like to start mentioning that over the last 10 months, I have worked directly with medical device manufacturers throughout the state of Chihuahua, government agencies, across the country, and multiple national organizations on challenges and opportunities facing the industry as the fight of comeback to the COVID-19. From the policy and regulatory decisions to local access to PPE and therapies, we have been engaged in constant discussions about Mexico's role in responding to this pandemic. These discussions have led to great partnerships between Paso-Juarez and other industries clusters throughout Mexico. As the number one exporter of medical devices in Mexico, Ciudad Juárez plays a critical role in the global response to COVID-19. Today, I'm very pleased to welcome our afternoon keynote speaker, who will be sharing more data and insights of this topic. But before, I would like to welcome our keynote sponsor, and I would like to thank Avanti Mediclear for their support in this event. I would like to introduce to you guys Fernando Luna. He's the director of Avanti Mediclear, and he will be sharing a message with us. Fernando, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Cecilia, and we appreciate the opportunity that you have given us to participate this year. My name is Fernando Luna. Good morning to you all. I am the CEO of Avanti Mediclear, and I would like to introduce the company just a bit. Like Cecilia mentioned, we are a sponsor to this 2020 Med Device Summit of El Paso-Juarez. And just to let you know, Avanti Mediclear is the first and up-to-date only e-beam commercial irradiation contractor in Mexico. We are located in Tijuana. We are servicing that particular cluster right now. We have achieved up to 3 years continuous operations up to date. We started really in December of 2017, servicing the medical device industry. And we have 22 continuous ongoing clients right now. And we, amongst them, most of them are located in Baja, although we have 2 in the Southern California region too, and even 1 in Chihuahua already. Our facility operates 24/7, and we have all the certifications required for this type of facility of the technology, e-beam. We are certified under the ISO 13485. We have the ISO 11137, which is for ionizing radiation, but we also have the ISO 9001 for industrial servicing. We are registered with FDA and COFEPRIS, and we have an operating license from our regulator, which is the National Nuclear Commission of Mexico. This for the safety since we are dealing with radiation. We provide sterilization via e-beam, as I mentioned, and we offer a full service of dosimetry lab services in-house. That is product qualifications, dose audits, maximum dose testing, minimum dose testing, and whatever else would be required for your products. No, we do it through 10 MeV mega electron volt machine with 20 kilowatt power. Although given the current demand that has grown so much in these challenging times, we will be expanding that facility up to 35 kilowatts in the first quarter of next year. We are participating in this event, and it stems from the fact that we are currently evaluating the feasibility of expanding our operations and setting up a new installation in the Ciudad Juarez, El Paso region. We should be reaching a decision in the first semester of 2021. Everything's looking up. We will most likely start then on the building. The building will take up to between 18 and 24 months and should be fully operational towards the end of 2022, early 2023. This will imply an investment of $12 million for the region at least, and bring close to 50 new direct jobs to the regions once consolidated. Basically, that's what I wanted to do. Like I mentioned, I hope you all take care, keep safe, and without further ado, I will pass over to Cecilia, and so that she can introduce the next talk, which will be MedDev Industry in Mexico, Lessons from COVID-19. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Fernando. And we invite you all after this conference to visit our trade show. They are there so that you can have direct communications with them. Well, thank you very much. And just before to start, I would like to remind you that this session will be recorded and will be posted following the event on the on-demand section on the platform. Also, you can put, if you have any comment or questions, you can put it on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. However, the chat function will be disabled during this presentation. And now it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Saúl De Los Santos. He is founder and CEO of Axis Centro de Inteligencia Estratégica. Saúl has extensive experience in research and consulting in regional development, productive integration, technology, and innovation management for private, governmental, and educational organizations. In 2010, he founded the company Instituto Axis, that is dedicated to highly specialized training services. He has recently led research around the challenges and opportunities of implementation of Industry 4.0 technologies, as well as the capabilities and potential of the medical device industry in Mexico. Saúl received a Master of Engineering with a specialty in quality and productivity at the Tecnológico de Monterrey. He has an MBA with a specialty in public administration from CETIS University and graduated from the Institute of Economic Development at the University of Oklahoma. He has directed research projects in the areas of regional and sectorial development, particularly in medium and high technology industry, among which the medical device, of course, stands out. Identify capacities and management, technical and talent requirements, from which initiatives and strategies have been derived that influence the promotion of foreign investment, development of productive chains, training of human resources, promotion of technological development, and institutional capacities. He recently created an interinstitutional research group, GIDI, of which he acts as general coordinator, and from which the impacts on companies derived from the COVID-19 pandemic as monitored in conjunction with researchers from El Colegio de la Frontera Norte, Colegio de Sonora, and Arizona State University. Well, Saúl, it's an honor to introduce you, and I am looking forward to hear your presentation.
Well, thanks a lot, Cecilia. Thanks for the intro. I'm glad to have you providing these kind words and such an extensive reference about myself. First of all, I would like to say that it is a challenge to talk in a specific, I would say, forward-thinking way about the medical device industry. Today, I'll be trying to cover 4 specific topics. First of all, the footprint of what the manufacturing industry in Mexico is regarding medical devices. Next, I'll go into the ecosystem capabilities, which deals mainly with the institutions, like both private and public institutions related to medical devices in Mexico. I'll focus specifically on Mexico on this presentation. Then from there on, we'll talk a little bit about COVID, how the pandemic for the past 8 months has put us through a set of challenges and uncertainties that have made after this 8 months, and I would say over, I had some figures here, but I'm missing several 100,000 people infected and deaths throughout Mexico and throughout the world. This has put the industry in a position to showcase its capabilities. And then last, as closing remarks, I would like to share with you some insights of how we see the industry evolving for the future. And also, I'm gonna comment on 3 specific reports, which are the basis of the information I'll be sharing with you today. First of all is this report called MedDev at Baja, which we put out in the middle of last year, which is an insight to our industry. Then about 2 weeks ago, CEPAL, which is the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, put out the investment report for 2020. And we played a small role as a company in that report, providing some insights for Mexico. And this report, I would advise you guys to download it and go through it, since there's a specific area regarding medical devices in Latin America. And lastly, the report we're currently finishing. As a matter of fact, we're gonna deliver it to CEPAL today later on, which is a study of the capabilities of Mexico regarding critical medical devices in the context of the pandemic. So a lot of the information you're gonna see here today, it's fairly new, and some of it, not even CEPAL has seen it. So we're very glad to share it with you guys today. Regarding the manufacturing footprint, well, of course, perhaps we all know, because we're related to the industry, that top states in medical device manufacturing in Mexico are very well identified, and roughly half of the manufacturing sites are in the northern border states of Mexico. Of course, this has, in terms of logistics and interaction with the US market, a whole set of advantages. But we also have to look into central Mexico, in particular Mexico City, the state of Mexico, and Jalisco, as also very relevant locations for medical devices. But we'll go into deeper detail on those issues. Just to point out, Baja California has roughly 20% of the establishments, and then Mexico City, it's relatively close to 14%, and then Jalisco and Chihuahua are close to 10% of the establishments. But establishments, or the number of manufacturing sites, it's not the best way to measure the footprint or the size and scope of the industry. So we have to go into deeper detail. Just as a summary, not to go into too many details, I will break it down into 2 types of industrial hubs that we categorized for the recent reports. One of them is export-oriented hubs, which in this case, the most significant ones are, of course, Ciudad Juarez and then Baja California, mainly in Tijuana, but other municipalities as well have significant participation. So if we look at the export-oriented hubs in Mexico, then we'll find that close to 60% of the employment for the industry is located in these regions, and specifically in Ciudad Juarez and in Baja California. And also we can see that 42% of the national production for the medical device industry, it's located in these specific regions, in these two specific industrial hubs, which are, as I think we all know, foreign direct investment driven. I mean, multinational corporations play the key role in the location and expansion of operations in the medical devices field. And also, one must say that these sites, these hubs, focus specifically on manufacturing under the Maquiladora program, the IMEX program. So it's very quite well categorized. And if we compare it to the industrial hubs oriented to internal markets, one will have to look into Guadalajara, the metropolitan zone of Guadalajara, Zapopan, Guadalajara, and then Mexico City, and in particular, two delegations that are next to each other, very central to Mexico. Most establishments are in either Juarez or Cuauhtemoc, those delegations in Mexico City. They tend to be rather small in terms of size of employment. And they only add up to around 5% of the national employment for the industry, but 10% of national production. So if you compare that data in terms of the number of employees and production value, one could say right off the bat that the cases of Mexican firms have at least double the value of production per employee compared to the export-oriented firms. And this has to do with the last point I'm putting over here. That is that those companies tend to have an extended participation in the value chain, which we'll see in the following slide. So this is the classic SMILE curve where we have from research and development, components, then at the bottom we have the final assembly and production activities and packaging. And then we go on to the right to distribution and then brand management and growing into the market. So in that sense, in orange, we can see that Maquiladora type production, the one that happens in Tijuana and in Juarez, it's largely concentrated on manufacturing activities, while the companies that are from national origin, centrally located in the country, tend to have a broad participation throughout the value chain. And for the purpose of that, I would like, because usually we don't think too much about those companies because they're rather small, the value in terms of their sales and their exports would not have anything to do in comparison with export manufacturing. But still, those companies are quite financially stable. They're very good business, but they have a very specific market and orientation strategy where they're quite effective at working at. So in what we did in this other graph, this chart, is we put number of establishments, employment, and then the bubbles indicate the production value. So as I was saying, no comparison in terms of the scale and scope of the export manufacturing sites compared to the ones focused on internal markets. This other chart shows another side of the equation in terms of the investment, foreign direct investment that was captured by each state throughout the last decade. In orange, we have Chihuahua, which added up to 34% in terms of the accumulated value for the whole decade. Then Baja California with 28%. That also has comes to clarify or consolidate the fact that these are regions that are driven, the growth is driven mainly by the foreign direct investment, and a lot of it from the US in a large proportion. Then we would have Estado de Mexico and Ciudad de Mexico, and then some other regions throughout the country. Just recently, 2 weeks ago, CEPAL published their yearly investment report for Latin America, as I mentioned before. And this graph indicates basically the balance, the trade balance between the imports and exports of medical devices for Latin American countries. The first set of graphs is for the added or the composed regional values in terms of high level or high complexity medical devices, mid complexity and low complexity devices. So in general terms, for the high complexity devices, which are usually electromedical devices for imaging and so forth, as a region, we have a deficit. We import more than we export in terms of those types of devices. But for the mid and low complexity devices, we have a surplus. Then if we break those three initial graphs down to the specific countries throughout Latin America, one would have to say right off the bat that the surplus is based on the participation of Mexico. No other country in the region has even a close scale factor compared to Mexico. One would have to say, yes, Costa Rica has a significant participation. And then if we look into a third country in Latin America, that would have to be Dominican Republic. Besides that, no other country has would be considered a net exporter in terms of medical devices. And of course, once we see Costa Rica, because of the size of the country, the employment, the labor pool, there's a limitation of the scale and the growth that can be achieved. And in that sense, we believe that Mexico still has a lot of room in terms of expanding operations. Let's talk briefly about the ecosystem. As I mentioned before, the ecosystem, it's mainly a matter of more of the institutions rather than the companies, even though companies are part of the ecosystem. But if we consider having the right scenario for an industry to develop, I mean, the conditions in the overall environment, that's why it's called an ecosystem. One would have to say that we have very uncoordinated efforts, but even after that, even considering that, the industry keeps growing year after year. So there's a lack of industrial policy, not only for medical devices. That's well known in Mexico. There's this saying about a politician back a few decades ago saying, no policy is the best policy. So if you can do basically whatever you want, that would give you a lot of room. But in particular, you have to consider that industries such as the aerospace, the automotive, and of course, medical devices, you have to tailor and customize infrastructure, policies, institutions, programs in order to provide better incentives as an overall for industrial growth. This we knew quite a bit about, but the recent CEPAL report we brought to the table that the availability and reliability of detailed industry information is quite scarce. So in that sense, when companies look into the market, try to find business partners, suppliers, potential customers, it's quite difficult. Another thing is that institutions tend to work, I would say, considerably well at the local levels, but not at the national level. At the national level, they're quite well unknown from each other. And that deals with poor linkages and coordination. So the efforts of supporting the industry as the overall still have a lot of room for improvement. So we have to be critical in that sense in order to make changes for the better and provide conditions for a faster industry expansion and growth. No national strategy for the industry. I'm not talking specifically about the policy from government, but about the strategy of what we're going to do, how we're going to set up labs, supporting infrastructure, and so forth, and how the industry itself is going to coordinate. We have instances such as the National Association for the Automotive Industry and the National Federation for the Aerospace Industry, but we have no similar institution for the medical device industry. And also, what this links also to the pandemic, the national health system, it's quite disconnected from the industrial hubs throughout Mexico. And that has a lot of repercussions in terms of how the industry can more effectively impact the quality of life of citizens throughout the country. So in that sense, talking about institutions and how to align the efforts. At the federal level, we have the National Science and Technology Council, COFEPRIS, and Centec Salud, and also the Ministry of Economy and the Ministry of Health, which would be I would say, the top institutions from the federal government that have different ways of either regulating or supporting the industry. In that sense, the coordination even between them is sometimes missing, even between instances that all are part of the federal government. So if we go down into a regional scale, then we see specific, in some cases, clusters such as for Baja California, Jalisco, and then of course, Juarez, El Paso. And then we don't see a cluster for Mexico City, but we see Canifarma having a specific area for medical devices, and MAMIF also playing a role in terms of the medical device industry coordination and support efforts. And then we'll have to look into other institutions that are more technical in the sense of assisting the industry. Of course, ProMexico started doing, I would say, a very good job in terms of the national plan and strategy, a roadmap for the medical device industry. But about 2 years ago, ProMexico was shut down by the federal government, so we don't have that coordination in terms of the exports, investment promotion, and technical information regarding the sector. The U.S.-Mexico Foundation for Science, FUMEC, used to have what they call Tech Salud, which was more of an accelerator program for medical device firms. That was also, I would say, closed down about a couple of years ago. And FUMEC keeps working with the medical device industry, but doesn't have a specific area devoted to medical devices anymore. Then we have the Maquiladora Association, which a lot of export manufacturers are part of, and that's also a lobbying, I would say, escape or window for the industry, and that plays a specific role. But we have to coordinate these efforts, and just yesterday, I decided to add IMSS and ISSSTE, which are the two largest institutional consumers of medical devices in Mexico, to this slide, because they should play a role in terms of helping, assisting to identify the key areas where the industry should work at, and how technology development, how the supply base and so forth serves in a better sense for the interests of the country. Let's move in a little bit from there into COVID. So we all know quite a bit from the news, but what happened, and in the first initial months, we had this consideration of companies being essential or not, and that having an impact in terms of the companies being able to operate or have to shut down. And for the current state, we don't have the policy about being essential as the central, I would say, determinant factor for operations, but rather a focus on the practices being implemented. But overall, what the pandemic brought to the table for the medical devices industry, and for all industries in Mexico, I would say, it's putting all the systems under stress testing. So we had a chance to prove how good we were in terms of managing and sustaining operations. And I would say for the medical device industry, that the test was approved. The industry in Mexico, medical device industry, proved to be robust, resilient, flexible enough to manage and keep an ongoing operation at competitive levels. And we had a lot of interviews in the recent months because of the CEPAL project with industry representatives. And a lot of it boils down to management capabilities. Management capabilities that some parts even mentioned that we're so used to government changing regulations and conditions, and we can adapt to very, very fast to changing circumstances. So management capabilities, it's a key part of the equation that has helped the industry being able to keep up with the production programs and deliveries, and in some cases, increasing volumes up to the most I've seen, 300% from the pre-pandemic levels. And then also complying with regulations and requirements surrounding the pandemic. It's easier for a medical device industry where people are already used to sanitation procedures, using face masks and so forth. It's far easier for them than to do it in a metal mechanic or plastics processing for other industries and so forth. And also, industry has proven to be capable and also committed to assisting the communities at a local level in a very, very significant manner. So in that sense, I would say that lesson number one is that the industry, it's robust. It's a very capable industry in Mexico. A second insight would be looking into how we were able to manufacture critical devices required by the pandemic. This chart was produced by FUMEC, and they were heavily involved in the initial months of the pandemic in the efforts of manufacturing medical devices, and in a lot of cases by companies that were from other fields, from the appliances, aerospace, automotive industry, electronics industry, and so forth. And what FUMEC has found, their analysis, their balance, is that there's a lack of leadership somehow in order to coordinate such a complex type of operation. I mean, this had to deal with a supply chain of critical components being available, qualified, and at the location and time required. Also, understanding regulations, also going through the approval processes and so forth. So in that sense, this test wasn't passed by the national manufacturing ecosystem. Medical device industry companies, in a large sense, kept focused on their production, and they were very successful in that sense. They were quite committed to what they were already doing before the pandemic, and also assisting a little bit on the rest of the requirements. But as a whole, the manufacturing had a very, very hard time in focusing in serving the needs brought to the table by the pandemic. That has more to do with coordination and leadership planning than it has to do with technical capabilities, I mean machinery, materials, and so forth. So it's more of a human side of issue to resolve, or institutional issue to resolve, rather than technical. There were two very, very large initiatives, one coordinated by FUMEC, which brought to the table Canacintra and UNAM, which is the largest university in Mexico, and several centers from CONACYT, such as CIDESI and several other ones. And also they were linked to the federal government institutions handling the pandemic and so forth. And they had an inventory of over 30 specific developments regarding ventilators. Some of those you'll see over here, the one from Tec de Monterrey with an ambu bag, the one from CIDESI, and those two that have names related to the Mexican god of wind, and Otomi, god for whisper, or word for whisper. And they were presented by the federal government as success stories. Some other ones are quite at a prototype level and very, very far from being something to be applicable. And then on the other side, you would see the Red OTT, which is the Technology Transfer Office network, and all their efforts, more in a private sense, trying to do part of the same, working on ventilators, but also working on other required devices. And you can just think how many thousands of people are behind these two initiatives, the budgets behind the institutions related to all of this. I mean, millions of pesos, millions of dollars, thousands of hours, and so forth. And the devices they produced were useful, but not up to par. And over here, one project that we had knowledge of, it's IDEM located in Mexico City with manufacturing site in Morelos. On their own, Biasis is their distribution channel. Ventilamex is the brand of the device. Produced what we consider the only device that's high level, professional, and was brought to the market even with limitations. So in that sense, you have to compare how come we had such infrastructure, such budget, and we couldn't produce something of the level that one individual company on their own with limited resources could. And that had to do a lot with them being focused and had the experience on building and putting devices into the market. So in that sense, there's a lot of room for improvement in the way that the ecosystem could coordinate. Lesson number 3. How about the impact on labor and bringing back the economy from the medical device industry? What we see in orange for most cases is the graphs of labor in a comparison between April, which was the lowest, I would say after the pandemic in March, April was the month with the lowest figures of employment, compared to the end of October, which was the last available data point a few weeks ago. Now we have the number for November, so we have to update, but still, in terms of comparing April to the end of October, one would see that Baja California, Nuevo León, and Chihuahua had the best numbers in terms of a positive balance in terms of net employment. And we see Tijuana, and then we see Juarez here in the orange, and then Mexicali over here, which is a smaller community in Baja. But Tijuana and Juarez had a big participation in bringing back the labor market at a national level. And medical devices firms had a lot to do in that equation. I'm not saying it's everything. I'm not saying that these 30,000 employees are all related to the medical device industry, but in a good part of them, they were. So in that sense, we have to look into the medical device industry as a stable overall source of employment and a motor, a dynamic motor for the economy. And that's something we had seen before in the previous crisis, economic crisis a few years back, that medical device industry, at least in Baja California, kept growing while other industries such as the automotive and electronics, consumer electronics, was reducing employment. So we should consider that medical device industry, it's a matter of national security. That's something, if we can sum up the pandemic into its relation to this industry that we're involved with, It's that it is a matter of national security, where COVID-19 has put stress test to the current status of the national health system and how we were prepared to handle situations such as this one. But we have to think up further into other requirements where the medical device industry, it's also something very critical for our communities. So looking forward, first of all, not everything is COVID. There's also other things happening in the global context. Industry 4.0, we consider it to have a wide area of opportunity in the medical device industry, even larger than for other industries such as the consumer electronics. If we were to be talking about cell phone manufacturing, the role of 3D printing would be important in some instances for prototypes and so forth. But if we're talking about prosthetics or the medical devices custom made for specific patients, which every unit is very, I would say, particular to a circumstance, application, and person, then 3D printing can play a very significant role. If we're talking about tracing, also traceability requirements, all the Internet of Things and connectivity, or industry internet, it has a lot to do in terms of that being able to be implemented. Nanotech, new materials, and so forth, there's a huge area of opportunity. Of course, when we see operations in Mexico, the engineering is more of a sustaining activity. It's not so closely related to new product development. And it's very difficult at those manufacturing stages to have a change in materials because you have to go back to the regulatory process of the approval of substitution of materials. And that's something we usually will not be even motivated to go into. But still, looking into the future, I think the medical device industry has to consider that software and electronics, nano and advanced materials are going to be part of the equation of manufacturing. Personalized medicine and the health of future generations, as we're seeing, that's also going to change a bit of how the market composition is, and that will pull the industry into adapting into those new trends. Sustainability, and in that sense, we're seeing a lot around end of life cycle and how the devices can be disposed of. A lot of controversy regarding if a device can be reused, repurposed, or recycled, and that in some instances is possible, and some other ones is quite difficult. And also to add to the equation, the China-US trade war or trade tensions, as we put it at the slide. I've been in China several times, and I've even visited, I'm not gonna call out names, but big manufacturing sites from US medical device manufacturers in China. And some of those, even with the new government in the US, the policy is gonna follow in that sense of where the production base for at least US companies is located. So one will have to think more deeply into nearshoring and reshoring processes and how we can offer added value in terms of capturing that investment that is pulled back from Asia. And I think the equation of what we add in as a region, and here I'm talking about specifically El Paso-Juarez and perhaps Tijuana, San Diego. And we have to think more in a binational sense. I think you guys in Juarez, El Paso have a better way of coordinating those efforts than we have over here. I'm based in Tijuana, by the way. But we have to look into a equation of added value considering both sides. So yes, closeness to the market, experience, decades of experience, not only in the medical device industry, but in other industries. Competitive costs, the figures from Mexico, KPMG, said that the savings for medical device manufacturing were about 20% compared to the US. That was about 3 years ago. That was the last figure that at least we have in our scope. From the top 10 medical device manufacturers, 8 of them have presence either in Tijuana, in Baja California, Juarez, or both. And so we can say that the top players in the medical device industry have chosen, have selected the region because of it being competitive. An export platform, basically more than 90% of our exports are to the US, and that has to do a lot with the companies being in the EMEX program. But still, Latin America, it's a complementary or an additional market, not as in terms of size, it's not comparable, but still it has the potential for it being served. R&D capabilities in a binational sense are quite considerable, and being in the same time zone and linking the institutional educations is also something we can bring to the table. And to close my presentation for today, I would like to leave some questions rather than some conclusions. I think we need to talk a lot more about how we're gonna develop a strategy, how we're gonna push industry forward, because I believe that investment is gonna keep landing in Mexico in terms of medical devices, but we have to think more in the sense of what we wanna do with that, how we're gonna make that more strategic for Mexico, and how we're gonna provide also greater value for investors. So one thing is, how do we maintain and consolidate the industry? Who plays the role of leadership? How is it going to be played out? How are we going to articulate our efforts? And which actors, which institutions are going to be the ones doing that? I mean, it's very difficult for a cluster such as Paso-Juarez to be coordinating national efforts. There's a whole set of regional and local issues to address in order for that to happen. And the binational synergies. And from there, I see in Juarez El Paso a lot of the institutions going back and forth, but how are governments going to be involved in that sense? And because of, if you think about it, the US health system, it's dependent on Mexico, on manufacturing in Mexico in a large extent. So that has to do with governments. So how are governments going to deal with those issues, and what's the plan for the future? How are we going to incorporate new technologies? I mean, all the electronics and digitalization and so forth in terms of products and processes. And how can small and mid-sized companies participate in that sense? In many instances, those are the ones that can implement and test new technologies in a faster, more efficient way. And last but not least, how are we going to capitalize the knowledge? I mean, there's a whole set of knowledge and skill base in the industry that maybe it doesn't quite transfer to educational institutions and other institutions, but it's also something that can be done, and it's quite beneficial for all. So I'll leave it at that, and if you have any questions, I do recommend that you download the MedDev at Baja and the CEPAL report for more insights. The newest report, as I mentioned before, we're gonna deliver it today. The latest report on Mexico capabilities for critical medical devices. So we'll let the cluster know when it's published, so you can access that information as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saúl. It was It was really interesting, all the presentation. We have several questions, but I would like to start with one about where do you see more growing in the industry for the is it for the export industry or for the inner market in Mexico?
Yeah, well, export manufacturing, I think that we're a hot topic internationally. So I don't think that US firms will consider too many developing countries because of their infrastructure. So we had advantages in the border region. Initially, a few decades ago, the Asian companies for the electronics industry brought a lot of discipline and processes and standardization as a way of doing business. And that is easily transferred into the medical device industry. So a lot of the new projects, we're currently working on merger and acquisition analysis, a company that wants to have a presence in Mexico and basically wants to acquire a property that's already in the medical device industry, and they're looking at border region. And so I think in that sense, and many others, in that sense, the border region will keep capturing foreign investment. The opportunity for the national firms, it is linked to the purchasing of government institutions. That's why it's so centralized close to Mexico City. And in that sense, the changes of the regulations of for purchasing how do you call licitación, the contest process for new purchases, it's under change in the federal government to eradicate corruption and become more transparent. And that's having an impact on manufacturers because the purchases are now becoming consolidated and companies have to figure out a different way of being competitive and participating in that. So again, I see an opportunity for both. The issue is how do we have a national plan and how do we link that into the national health system? So I would say what we're doing over here in Chihuahua, Baja California, can have a greater benefit in terms of the health system in Mexico. And that's a great opportunity as well.
Thank you very much. We have several questions and we have two of them about the IMEX program. The first one will be, how can IMEX focus markets like Juarez or Tijuana move more towards innovations and more complex devices?
Yeah, well, if we go back to the Maquiladora program, and when it started, it was more of a labor-oriented policy, right? And it still is. So if we think of a more progressive IMEX program that would take into consideration in terms of the content, because that's the issue. It's the level of content in a device. So how do you account or put into the equation intellectual content? And if you do so, if you're not only dealing with the value in the pedimentos, in the export forms, about the parts and the materials, but you're also putting into the equation the value, intellectual value, which is intangibles. Because if you do it the simple way, you're gonna say it's already there because the value of the payroll for personnel can easily be calculated for the engineering personnel and put into the equation. But no, that's not it. I mean, if you do engineering, if you do R&D, then you're producing X times the value of the cost of that development. And if you put that into the equation and take it into consideration, then IMEX could have an impact, right? So it's not currently required, and the methods of considering that value into the content, it's not, I don't think it's there. And also in terms of the suppliers, in terms of integrating more Mexican content, there's some issues to address as well, because we have this policy of Mexican firms have to show basically every month that they're at par with the tax system. They don't own any taxes. And for some companies, it's better not to have Mexican suppliers and don't deal with that, because if you're buying externally, then that doesn't apply. So you're not running a risk of being suspended because your supplier doesn't comply with tax payment. So we have to revise, and maybe it's IMEX 2.0, I don't know, but something that goes beyond labor and export figures.
And I think that point of that you're mentioning about the supply chain, it leads to these next questions. Next question, that is, how can IMEX markets like Juarez develop a locally based value chain? I think what you are mentioning, I think that's one of the strengths of the border, right? To have that kind of services in both sides of the border.
Yes. That's a great advantage. There's other advantages in terms of being close to the border for the medical device industry. But one, it's accessing suppliers from the US side. So in that sense, you have to say there's a whole range of products and services. Some of them are materials, some are semi-processed, some are, I would say, components already manufactured that are going to be assembled and so forth. So you have to break them down and do a feasibility analysis and say, okay, these types of supplies, whether it be products or services, can be or are more conveniently sourced from El Paso, and those other ones are better supplied from the Mexican side. So that has to do with strategy. If we're just currently allowing companies to figure it out, but if we had a plan, if we had a roadmap in that sense, maybe in a decade of working and constructing that supply base. And a good example of that, it's sterilization. We have done at least 3 or 4 market studies related to sterilization in Baja California. And I'm sure that Avanti Mediclear has read 2 or 3 of those at least in the past for their project in Baja, because that was the purpose of those documents. What we found is that the current suppliers in the US didn't have any interest in establishing a facility in Baja, in Mexico. There had to be an outsider, a new player that came into the market that was actually interested in establishing in Baja, in this case, Avanti. So going back, rounding up, in terms of the supply base, one has to be more strategic and select which links of the value chain are feasible for each side of the border.
Thank you very much. And I would like to go this last question. Are we the first ones to see this data that you're presenting?
About 30% of it, yes.
Great.
And some other ones, I would say it takes a little bit of time to process. I mean, a lot of the information is public. And going back to the information limitations, sometimes data from INEGI, from official data from INEGI, is for establishments, not for companies. So a company can run 4 establishments, and we see it as a cluster as 1, while INEGI sees it as 4. So it's sometimes not comparable. We have to be very careful on how we analyze and read the information. Exports are not the same as production value and so forth. So yes, but if we can share the presentation via you guys with the audience, that would be great. And we look forward to sharing the rest of the publications.
That's great. Thank you very much. I imagine that it was a lot of work, not only to make all these interviews, I can imagine that, but also to digest all the information that is everywhere and try to put it in a consensus way, in a very readable way.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Saúl. And it was really interesting. Thank you very much for your partnership, and we are looking forward to have any kind of collaboration with you in the future. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
I would like to thanks once again to Avanti Mediclear for sponsoring this session. Please remember to visit Avanti Mediclear booth at the virtual hall to learn more about them and their sterilization technologies. I will also thank to Ingenio RX, RexMed, Healthcare, and the MCA Foundation for sponsoring this year's summit. As a reminder, this presentation will be available on demand later today, and it's going to be accessible at least for 1 month in this platform, so you can have time to reach again for all this information. We thank you very much for joining us today on our first day of timely webinars and sessions. We hope you find them very informative and interesting. Tomorrow we will have another great group of speakers and high quality conferences. Just briefly, for our opening speaker, we will have our Paso-Juarez board president and CEO of one of the region most prominent contract manufacturers, Mr. Julio Chu. We will also be welcomed by the Honorable Alejandra de la Vega, the Secretary of Innovation and Economic Development of the state of Chihuahua. You don't want to miss our morning keynote featuring Stephen Bites from AdvaMed and Sandra Ligia Gonzalez from the Inter-American Coalition of Regulatory Convergence. They will be sharing the latest regulatory and policy issues facing the medical device manufacturing industries in both sides of the border. Later in the program, we will have an amazing panel with Nico Tejeda, Group CEO of the Hospitals of Providence, and Dr. Jeffrey Spire, President of the Rio Grande Urology Group, to discuss how healthcare providers are dealing with the PPE inventories and supply chains. And our last session and keynote feature speaker from Deloitte, who will be presenting their research on accelerating smart manufacturing. As you can see, it will be a great day, and we will have a great lineup of topics and speakers. So we hope to see you tomorrow we will start 8:45 a.m. To kick off the second day of the summit. Thank you very much, everybody, and stay safe.